Imagine this, a quiet neighborhood somewhere in the United States. The kind of place where the sidewalks are clean, the grass is neatly trimmed, and the houses look identical, almost like copy-paste perfection. It's the kind of suburb people move to when they want safety, peace, and the comfort of predictability. You'd expect nothing dark to grow here, but that's the thing about darkness, it doesn't need an invitation. It hides in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Tonight, in one of those identical houses, a woman sits by her window. She has no idea that this ordinary evening is about to shift the course of her life. And what's more terrifying, she doesn't know that someone is watching her, someone who has already decided she is the center of his world. The way I'm telling you this right now is deliberate, because you need to understand from the beginning that this is not a coincidence. He didn't stumble across her by accident. He chose her, and you're about to find out why. I know you might be tempted to skip ahead, maybe thinking you can catch the juicy parts later, but trust me on this. The hook you're feeling right now, the suspense crawling through your chest, is exactly the reason you need to stay. People across YouTube, especially in the US, are addicted to mysteries, obsessed with true crime vibes, fascinated by thriller romances, and that's exactly where this story will take you. It's a psychological drama filled with obsession, secrets, and a shocking twist you won't see coming. And if you think you can predict it, I dare you stay till the end and see if you're right. Now let's talk about her, the woman at the center of this unfolding storm. Her name is Emily. Though to the person watching her, she is much more than a name. To him, she's a story worth living in, a breathing fantasy he can't walk away from. Emily is the kind of woman who looks ordinary at first, glance, brown hair, quiet smile, the kind of presence you'd pass by without noticing if you weren't paying attention. But when you really see her, when you watch her as closely as he does, you begin to realize she has layers. There's a softness in her that makes her approachable, but there's also a mystery in her silence that makes her unforgettable. Emily doesn't know it yet, but she's become the main character in someone else's narrative. And you know what's chilling? She has no clue. Right now, she's just sitting there, sipping tea, scrolling through her phone, thinking she's safe. But every move she makes is being absorbed, remembered, cherished by eyes that will not let go. And that brings me to him, the watcher. Who is he? Why can't he stop? Here's the trick. I'm not going to give you his name yet. I'm not going to make it that easy, because names give away too much too soon. What I will tell you is that he's not a stranger in the traditional sense. He isn't some random figure lurking in the shadows without connection. No, this man has ties, invisible threads that link him to Emily's world, and that's what makes this even more dangerous. He is close enough to touch her life without her ever noticing, and once you realize how close he is, you'll understand why you needed to hear this story from start to finish. He's not watching her because of lust, or even simple curiosity. He's watching because he believes he's found meaning in her, something missing in his own life. Something worth crossing every boundary for. Now pause for a moment, and let me connect directly with you. I know right now you might be leaning a little closer to your screen, maybe even looking over your shoulder, because I've just planted that seed of paranoia inside you, and that's intentional. Because think about it, how many times have you walked into a room, or sat by your window, or even scrolled through your phone, without realizing that somebody, somewhere, could be focusing entirely on you? The internet, the cameras, the neighbors, the strangers. It doesn't take much for privacy to crumble. That's why this story hits harder, because it isn't just Emily's story. It could be yours, it could be mine, and that's the psychology I want you to sit with. That's why you shouldn't click away, because the answer you're researching for, the resolution to this creeping tension, will only come if you stay with me until the very last second. Emily doesn't feel watched yet. She's too caught up in her life. She works at a publishing house, editing manuscripts, dreaming of one day writing her own book. She tells herself stories at night, stories that help her escape the routine of a day. Stories where she's the heroine who gets swept up in an unexpected romance or an adventure. What she doesn't realize is that her life has already become that kind of story, but it's not the one she imagined. It's darker, stranger, and far more dangerous. And while she's busy dreaming about a better tomorrow, someone is making sure they're part of every detail of her today. Meanwhile, the watcher keeps his distance. He knows when to disappear, when to step back into the crowd, when to become invisible. But even when he's gone, he's not really gone, because his mind never leaves her. He replays every gesture, every smile, every word she speaks, until it feels like he owns them. And slowly, the line between observing and controlling begins to blur. This is where the real conflict starts, because obsession has a way of rewriting reality. And if you think this is just about him watching her from afar, you're mistaken. He's about to step closer, closer than she could ever imagine. And when that happens, nothing will ever be the same. Now here's the master move to keep you here. I know you want to know how this ends, but I'm not going to hand it to you right now. You need to feel the climb, the build-up, the suspense, stretching until it nearly breaks. That's how this story works, and that's how you stay locked in. Because what's coming will not just answer your curiosity, it will shock you, and if you click away now, you'll never get that payoff. Think of it like this. You came here searching for a trending story. something that could pull you in like the best thrillers and mystery dramas on YouTube. And that's exactly what this is. You're in the middle of it, and now you have no choice but to keep watching because the cliffhanger you're about to experience will leave you craving the next part. Emily rises from her chair and pulls the curtains shut, thinking she's safe from the night outside. But what she doesn't know is that shutting the curtains doesn't shut him out. He's already inside her world in ways she can't comprehend, and as she moves through her house, humming softly to herself, he makes a decision. Tonight won't just be another night of watching. Tonight, something changes. And that's where I'll leave you, right on the edge of discovery. Right at the moment when the air is heavy with anticipation, when you know something is about to happen but you can't yet see what. The watcher is no longer satisfied with shadows. He's stepping forward. The question is, what will Emily do when she finally realizes he's been there all along? Emily had no idea that pulling those curtains closed only gave her the illusion of safety. Like shutting the lid on a box without realizing the box itself had already been tampered with. She moved about her small but warm house, a 2-bedroom rental that she'd been living in for the past 6 months since breaking up with her longtime boyfriend, Ryan. That breakup had left her raw, her heart scraped by betrayal, her mind still searching for answers about how she hadn't seen it coming. She told herself she'd moved on, that nights of crying into her pillow were behind her, but truthfully, she still replayed those final arguments in her head, his phone buzzing at odd hours, his dismissive excuses, the way he'd suddenly grown distant when she asked the simplest questions. Maybe that's why tonight she was humming to herself in the kitchen, pouring another cup of tea, trying to fill the silence with small distractions. She believed she was piecing her life back together, but she couldn't shake the feeling that some unseen force was waiting for her to stumble again. For those of you watching, let me stop here and draw you closer into her world, because you need to understand the fragile balance she's living in. Emily isn't careless. She isn't the type of woman who would easily fall prey to anyone. She's thoughtful, observant, someone who double-checks her locks before bed, who memorizes the route she takes to work, who notices when the same car passes her twice on the street. But trauma has a way of dulling instincts. And after her breakup, after losing the man she once trusted most, Emily's guard wasn't as sharp as it used to be. And that is where danger always creeps in, during those quiet moments when you're tired of being on edge, when you convince yourself it's safe to relax. That's when people like him, the watcher, step forward, because they sense when you're most vulnerable. Earlier that day, Emily had gone about her routine without any idea of the storm brewing around her. She'd spent hours at the publishing house, her desk stacked with manuscripts from aspiring authors hoping to make it big in the romance and mystery genres. Ironically, she'd been editing a story about a young woman caught in a dangerous relationship, shaking her head at the dramatic twists, thinking the writer had gone too far into the realm of obsession. If only she'd realized how closely her own life was about to mirror the fiction she was critiquing.
After work, she'd grabbed coffee with her best friend, Melissa, at a cafe near downtown. Melissa was a bright personality, the kind of friend who always spoke too loud and laughed too hard. But her presence grounded Emily. Over lattes and pastries, Melissa tried to nudge her back into the dating world, teasing her about joining trending dating apps like Hinge or Bumble, telling her that everyone in the US was meeting someone online these days. Emily laughed it off, promising she wasn't ready, but she couldn't deny the sting of loneliness tugging at her chest. That loneliness is what made her the perfect target, because when someone feels unseen, they become vulnerable to anyone who decides to notice them. What Emily didn't know was that someone had already noticed her, long before tonight. He had memorized her patterns, her favorite cafe, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, even the exact time she returned home every evening. That's why he was here now, outside her house, standing in the shadows of the trees where no streetlight reached. He didn't just watch for the sake of watching. He was studying, calculating, waiting for the right time to step into her life. And as he stood there, invisible to her, another layer of tension crept into this story, because while he might be the most obvious threat, he wasn't the only one in her orbit. That's where I need you, the viewer, to start questioning what you think you know. Because when you're watching a story like this, your mind automatically looks for the villain, the one face to pin everything on. But what if it's not that simple? What if the person watching her isn't the only danger? Remember Ryan, the ex-boyfriend? He might have left, but he hadn't disappeared completely. He'd been spotted more than once lingering around her office building, claiming he just happened to be passing through. Melissa mentioned to Emily, in a half-joking way, that Ryan might not be over her at all, that maybe he regretted letting her go. Could he be the one watching her now? Or is that too easy, too obvious? And then there's her neighbor, Mr. Daniels, the older man who lives alone across the street. He's always been polite, always quick with a wave, but lately, Emily noticed how often he seemed to be outside whenever she got home. At first, she brushed it off as coincidence, but coincidences pile up, don't they? The mail in his hands when he pretended to check the box for the third time that day. The way his curtains twitched as soon as she stepped onto her porch, all seemed harmless until you start piecing it together. Viewers, I want you to sit with that discomfort, that uncertainty, because this story isn't going to hand you an easy suspect. You're going to question everyone, and that's exactly how it's meant to be. Emily didn't think twice tonight as she texted Melissa a quick goodnight, locked her front door, and settled on the couch with a blanket. She scrolled through trending YouTube videos, true crime breakdowns, romance story times, even a few reaction videos, her mind bouncing between distraction and fatigue. But just as her eyelids grew heavy, a sound echoed faintly from outside, sharp enough to snap her back to full attention. It wasn't the crash of a car or the shout of a neighbor. It was softer, more deliberate, like the crunch of footsteps on gravel. She froze, her heart picking up speed, her mind instantly cataloguing possibilities. Was it just the wind, a stray cat, or was it someone outside her window? Here's the part where you, the viewer, need to pay very close attention, because this is where the story begins to tighten its grip. The watcher knows Emily heard him, and now he has to decide whether to reveal himself or retreat into silence. And Emily, torn between paranoia and rationality, has to choose whether to dismiss the noise or confront it. These are the tiny decisions that shape the course of everything to come, the moments you never think matter until they change everything. She stood slowly, blanket slipping from her lap, her eyes fixed on the window she'd closed earlier. The curtain swayed faintly, though she couldn't tell if it was from the air vent or something outside brushing against the glass. With trembling fingers, she reached for her phone, hesitated, then set it back down. Calling the police felt dramatic, over the top, maybe even foolish, if it turned out to be nothing. But what if it wasn't nothing? What if she was already too late to stop what was coming? And this is where I'll leave you again, right at the edge of that thought, right where your curiosity burns hottest. Because the truth is, the sound outside wasn't random, and Emily's instincts weren't wrong. But before I tell you what happens next, before I reveal who is behind the shadow moving closer to her door, I want you to hold on to that uncertainty. Because the question isn't just who's watching hurts why. And when you finally find out, you'll realize the danger was never just outside her window. Emily stood frozen in the center of her living room, her breath caught in her throat as the faint crunch outside grew quieter, then vanished altogether, like someone retreating carefully into the night. She wanted to convince herself it was nothing, just her imagination twisting the silence into danger. But deep down she knew better. Something was wrong, something was off, and ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear. Still, after several minutes of holding her ground, she slowly sat back down, her body stiff with nerves, trying to shake the heaviness pressing against her chest. She told herself she'd deal with it tomorrow, that a good night's sleep would clear her head. But the truth was, tomorrow would not be easier. It would be harder, far harder, because the moment she began pulling at the thread of this mystery, obstacles started rising in her path, like walls designed to block her from finding out the truth. The first obstacle came the next morning when Emily decided to check the security camera she had installed on her porch months earlier, a decision made after her breakup with Ryan when she wanted an extra layer of safety. Normally, the camera's feed recorded every delivery, every movement of the neighborhood cats, every Amazon package dropped at her door. But when she scrolled through the footage for the night before, her stomach dropped. The recordings were gone. The timeline jumped from late afternoon, straight into the early hours of dawn, with the entire stretch of time she needed missing like it had never existed. At first, she assumed it was a glitch, some technical issue, but when she checked the storage history, she saw something chilling. The files had been erased, not corrupted. Someone had deliberately wiped the evidence, and the realization made her skin crawl. Someone hadn't just been watching her, they had been close enough, bold enough, to tamper with her security system. That was no accident. That was a warning. She tried to push through her day as if nothing had happened, but the tension followed her like a shadow. At work, she couldn't concentrate, her eyes darting to the window whenever movement passed outside. Melissa noticed her distraction and asked what was wrong, but Emily hesitated. She didn't want to sound paranoid, didn't want to spill a story that even she wasn't sure she believed yet. But before she could answer, Melissa's phone buzzed with a message, and Emily caught a strange look flash across her friend's face, one she couldn't quite read. Melissa quickly brushed it off, joking about another dating app disaster, but Emily couldn't ignore the unease it stirred. For the first time, she questioned if Melissa was telling her everything, or if there was more her best friend was hiding. That tiny seed of doubt planted itself in her mind, and it wouldn't stop growing. Later that evening, Emily returned home determined to double-check the camera system again. But another surprise awaited her. A small envelope sat on her porch, plain and unmarked, without postage or a return address. She picked it up carefully, her hands trembling, and stepped inside before tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with only 6 words written in blocky handwriting. "Stop looking before you regret it." No name, no explanation, nothing to trace it back to anyone. Her chest tightened, her heart pounding as she read the words again and again. The message echoing louder in her head. Someone wanted her to stop digging, but she hadn't even started yet, which meant they knew she was close, closer than she realized, and that terrified her even more. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the letter clutched on her nightstand, trying to piece together the fragments of her life that suddenly seemed riddled with holes. Was Ryan behind this? Could he be so bitter, so angry about their breakup that he wanted to scare her into silence? Or was it her neighbor, Mr. Daniels, whose quiet politeness masked something darker? And what about Melissa? Was there a reason she seemed nervous earlier? A reason she might know more than she let on? The questions circled endlessly, refusing to settle, until her mind landed on a memory she hadn't thought about in years. A secret she had buried so deeply she almost convinced herself it had never happened. When Emily was in college, long before Ryan, long before her publishing job, there had been another man, a professor, a mentor who had taken an unusual interest in her work, praising her ideas, encouraging her late-night study sessions. At first, she believed it was genuine, harmless admiration, until his compliments grew too personal, his invitations too suggestive.
She had tried to cut ties quietly, to slip away without confrontation, but the man hadn't taken rejection kindly. He had warned her back then, whispering words she had tried hard to forget. "You'll regret turning your back on me." For years, she believed he had moved on, that the past was finally behind her. But now, with the missing camera footage, the threatening letter, and the creeping suspicion that someone was inside her life again, Emily couldn't help but wonder if the ghost of that betrayal had resurfaced. The tension tightened when she found something else missing the following day: her journal, a leather-bound notebook where she poured every private thought, every fear, every fleeting dream. She always kept it in the drawer of her nightstand, hidden but not locked, a place she trusted in the safety of her own home. But now, when she reached for it, the drawer was empty. The discovery made her knees weak, her breath short, because if someone had taken her journal, they now knew everything. Every private memory, every note about Ryan, every passing mention of Melissa, even the fragments she had once written about her professor. Her inner world was no longer hers. Alone it had been stolen, exposed, and twisted into someone else's hands. And just when she thought she couldn't feel any more suffocated by the invisible net tightening around her, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no name, just a photo. It was of her journal, open on a page she had written only weeks ago, where she admitted she still sometimes dreamed of Ryan, even though she hated herself for it. Her stomach dropped, her mind spinning in panic. Whoever had sent this wasn't just watching her from outside anymore. They were inside her home, inside her most private thoughts. Before she could even decide what to do next, another message arrived, 5 chilling words that froze her in place. He was never the problem. Emily stared at the screen, her body trembling, her mind grasping for meaning. Who were they talking about? If Ryan wasn't the problem, if the Watcher wasn't who she assumed, then who was it? And why did they seem to know so much about her past, things she had never shared with anyone? The warning wasn't just about her future anymore, it was tied to her past, a past she thought she had escaped, but one that was now clawing its way back to the surface. And that is where we leave her, standing in the dim glow of her living room, phone in hand, her pulse hammering, the weight of betrayal pressing down harder than ever. Because in that moment, Emily realized the truth wasn't just hidden outside her window. It was buried deep in the lives around her, waiting to be unearthed, waiting to destroy everything she thought she knew. The question now is who sent that message, and why are they so certain the danger isn't who she thinks it is? Emily stood frozen, her phone trembling in her hand, her eyes glued to that chilling message that seemed to shatter every assumption she had made so far. He was never the problem. The words echoed inside her mind like a warning bell she couldn't silence. Who were they talking about, and why did it feel like whoever sent this message knew her better than she knew herself? She replayed the moment she realized her journal was gone, the missing camera footage, the unmarked letter that told her to stop digging it, All pointed to someone who wasn't just close, but someone who wanted to manipulate her, break her trust, and twist her reality until she no longer knew which direction was safe. But before she could take her next step, another thread in this tangled web began to unravel, and it dragged someone else into the nightmare. The next morning, Melissa showed up at Emily's door earlier than usual, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously as if she had run the whole way. She held her phone out before even saying hello, her hand shaking as she thrust it toward Emily. On the screen was a message nearly identical to the one Emily had received, but the words were different, tailored like they had been written for her specifically. "She is not who you think she is." Melissa's voice cracked as she whispered, "Who would send me this? And why about you?" Emily's stomach turned cold because this meant it wasn't just her anymore. Whoever was behind this game was reaching into the lives of the people around her, pulling them into the same spiral of paranoia and suspicion. The two women sat together in Emily's kitchen, staring at their phones, trying to piece together the timing and intent of these messages. Melissa swore she hadn't told anyone about Emily's late-night fears, hadn't mentioned the missing footage, hadn't shared the warning note, but the fact that she now had her own message, one that cast doubt on Emily herself, only made the situation murkier. If the sender wanted Emily to believe Ryan or Mr. Daniels was the danger, why target Melissa with a message that flipped the suspicion back onto Emily? It was as if the Watcher wanted to break them apart, isolate Emily by planting seeds of mistrust in the people she leaned on most. And it was working, because though Melissa held her friend's hand across the table, Emily saw hesitation in her eyes, a flicker of doubt that hadn't been there before. Later that day, Emily received another blow that shook her already fragile trust in her own judgment. She had finally called the publishing house's IT department, asking them to double-check her home security app, since she couldn't retrieve the erased footage. Hours later, she got an email back with a shocking update. According to their network trace, someone had accessed her camera feed remotely, using her login credentials. That part didn't surprise her. It was the line at the bottom of the report that turned her blood cold. The IP address used in the breach traced back to Melissa's neighborhood. Not Melissa's exact house, but close enough that Emily's mind began to spin. Was it coincidence, a setup, or was her best friend hiding something she could no longer ignore? She wanted to ask Melissa directly, to confront her with the truth, but fear kept her silent. Because what if Melissa really was part of it? What if the laughter, the coffee shop talks, the reassuring words had all been part of a cover? The message Melissa had shown her suddenly seemed less like a threat and more like a carefully staged performance. But then again, Emily knew how easily the Watcher could manipulate evidence. What if this was another trick, another trap meant to tear them apart? And then came the moment that escalated everything, the detail that made it impossible to ignore the shadows creeping closer. When Emily returned home that evening, another envelope was waiting for her, tucked neatly under her doormat. Her hands shook as she opened it, bracing herself for another vague warning, but what she found inside was far worse. A photo, grainy but unmistakable, taken inside her bedroom. She recognized the angle immediately, because it was from her dresser mirror, the one she often stood in front of while getting ready for work. Her reflection was there, frozen mid-motion, her hair half-pinned, her mouth caught open in a laugh she didn't remember, and scrawled across the bottom of the photo in thick black ink were the words, "She told you not to trust her." Emily's pulse raced as she stared at the photo, her skin prickling with the undeniable reality that whoever was doing this wasn't just outside her home anymore. They were inside. They had been inside while she was there, close enough to capture her in a private, unguarded moment, and then slip away without leaving a trace. The note on the photo only deepened the divide forming between her and Melissa, but it also opened the door to another horrifying thought. Was Melissa being manipulated too? Was she another victim in this game, or had she been a player all along? The more Emily turned it over in her mind, the less certain she became. And just when she thought the ground couldn't shift any further beneath her feet, she got a call from Ryan. His voice was low, almost apologetic, as he said he needed to meet her. "It's important," he whispered, "and it's about what's been happening to you." Emily's chest tightened with dread. Ryan hadn't spoken to her in weeks, and now suddenly he wanted to warn her. Could she trust him, or was this another layer in the trap being woven around her? The timing was too perfect, too suspicious, but curiosity gnawed at her, forcing her to consider the possibility that Ryan held answers she couldn't find anywhere else. As she hung up the phone, her hands trembling, Emily realized she was surrounded on all sides by uncertainty. Melissa with her cryptic message, Ryan suddenly reaching out, the missing footage, the stolen journal, the chilling bedroom photos. Every piece of evidence seemed to contradict the last, each pointing her in a different direction. And the cruelest part was that she couldn't tell if she was being pushed toward the truth or pulled further away from it. The Watcher was no longer just observing her life from the outside. He was orchestrating it, twisting it into a maze with no clear exit. And that is where the story now balances, on the knife's edge of trust and betrayal, as Emily prepares to meet Ryan. Unsure if he has the key to unraveling the mystery or just another shadow pulling her deeper into it. Because somewhere behind all of this noise, behind the threats and the manipulation, lies the real truth. But for now, it remains just out of reach. taunting both Emily and you with the question that still burns brightest. Who is the Watcher, and why does he know more about Emily's past than she ever dared to reveal? The night that followed carried with it a heaviness that our main character couldn't shake off, as though the air itself had turned into a silent accomplice to the unease clawing at their nerves. For days they had tried to convince themselves that what was happening could be explained rationally, that maybe their imagination was simply taking them too far, but the truth was beginning to corner them, refusing to allow escape. Walking home under the dim, flickering streetlights, they couldn't ignore the faint sound of footsteps echoing just a little too closely behind them, keeping time with their pace, pausing when they paused, moving again when they moved. It was subtle enough to make them doubt themselves, but persistent enough to remind them that this wasn't some random accident. The message they had received earlier still burned in their memory, words that hinted not only at observation but at an obsession that was growing more dangerous by the day. And it was in that moment that the line between curiosity and fear completely collapsed. They weren't just being watched, they were being hunted, and the chilling realization made their pulse throb like a drum inside their chest. The danger finally revealed itself in a way that could no longer be brushed aside, as paranoia when someone close to them suddenly disappeared without warning. This person had been their anchor, their silent reassurance that they weren't completely alone in their struggle to understand what was happening, and now they were gone. No explanation, no goodbye, just vanished into the same shadows that seemed to be crawling closer each day. Panic set in, but so did guilt, because deep down they wondered if their involvement in the mystery had somehow pulled others into the crosshairs of something far darker than they could comprehend. It was as if the world had shifted overnight. The familiar places they used to find comfort in now reeked of suspicion, and even a ringing phone felt like a weapon disguised as normalcy. The disappearance was not random, it was a message. A warning that whoever was behind this wasn't simply playing games anymore. They were closing in, and they weren't afraid to escalate. The emotional toll weighed heavily, forcing them to confront fears they never thought they would face. Every reflection in a window became a potential enemy. Every shadow a reminder that safety was slipping further away. They found themselves questioning even the people they trusted most, wondering if the friend who checked on them too often was hiding secrets, or if the co-worker who avoided eye contact knew more than they admitted. Their mind became a battlefield where trust and suspicion clashed violently, leaving them exhausted and vulnerable. Fear turned ordinary moments into tests of survival. Unlocking the door to their home felt like gambling with fate, and even the sound of a car pulling up outside sent them into a spiral of dread. The thought that someone could be watching every move, memorizing routines, and planning the next strike was enough to keep them awake at night, staring at the ceiling, whispering questions to themselves that had no answers. And just when they thought the pressure couldn't get worse, the direct threat arrived, ripping away any remaining illusion of safety. It was more than words this time, it was personal, undeniable, and sharp enough to cut through every layer of defense they had tried to build. The threat wasn't just about control anymore, it was about possession, about making it clear that the person behind this wasn't planning on stopping. The message was designed to paralyze, to shake them so deeply that they'd consider giving up the fight altogether. But instead of surrendering, it triggered something raw and powerful, a desperate need to resist even though they had no idea who they were resisting against. They were trapped between fear and defiance, caught in a game where the rules kept changing, and yet the sense that they had to keep pushing forward only grew stronger. The unanswered questions swirled faster than ever, leaving them with the realization that they were no longer in control of their own life. Who was behind this constant watching, this shadow that seemed to know every move before it happened? Why had someone close to them been taken? And what role did they themselves play in a story that felt like it had been written long before they even realized they were part of it? Most importantly, how far was this mysterious figure willing to go to ensure they could never escape their gaze? These questions hung in the air like a storm waiting to break, demanding answers that still felt impossibly out of reach. And with each passing hour, the darkness seemed to thicken, leaving the chilling sense that the real nightmare was only just beginning. The pressure that had been slowly building finally reached a point where it demanded action, and the main character found themselves staring down choices they never wanted to make. Fear had cornered them, but what made it worse was the gnawing uncertainty about the people closest to them. For weeks they had clung to the idea that at least their inner circle was safe, that the people they trusted most would never betray them, but the evidence mounting before them whispered otherwise. One small inconsistency in the story, one message that seemed to arrive at the wrong time, one look that lingered a little too long. Suddenly, all the details that had felt harmless became glaring red flags. Now they were standing in front of someone they had known for years, someone whose presence had always been a source of comfort, and asking themselves whether this person was truly a friend or the very hand that had been guiding the shadow stalking them. Confrontation felt like stepping into fire, but silence had become unbearable. They realized the cruel truth: if they didn't speak now, they might never get the chance again. The confrontation itself unfolded like a knife cutting through the fragile thread of trust holding their world together. They wanted to believe in the person across from them, wanted to hold on to the idea that loyalty still existed, but the words spilling out were laced with suspicion and accusation. Every answer they got only seemed to deepen the mystery instead of clearing it. Their voice trembled with anger and desperation as they demanded explanations, but deep down, what they feared most was confirmation that the betrayal was real. It was a brutal emotional gamble pushed too hard, and they risked alienating the only ally they might have left. But hold back, and they might be inviting danger even closer. The room itself seemed to shrink under the weight of the unspoken truths hanging between them, and by the end of the exchange, nothing felt the same. Trust had cracked wide open, leaving them more isolated than ever, and the chilling thoughts settled in. Maybe they had been letting the enemy sit right next to them all along, just when they thought their mind couldn't handle another blow. A new ultimatum arrived, stripping away the illusion of time and forcing them into a decision they weren't ready to make. The warning came blunt and merciless, leaving no room for hesitation. Either they stopped searching for answers and guaranteed their safety, or they kept digging and risked losing everything: friends, family, and even their own life. It wasn't a threat hidden behind flowery words. It was a line drawn in the sand, and the chilling clarity of it left them paralyzed. Safety had always seemed like the obvious choice, but the hunger for truth had grown into an obsession, gnawing at their mind and making it impossible to walk away. They were caught between the desperate need to protect themselves and the burning drive to finally uncover who had been controlling their every move. And the cruelest part of it all was knowing that whichever path they chose would come at a devastating cost. The emotional weight of the ultimatum pressed down harder than the fear of being followed or the paranoia of being watched. It struck at the heart of who they were, forcing them to question their values and their very identity. Were they the type of person who bowed to fear, or were they willing to risk everything for a chance at the truth? Nights became unbearable, their mind replaying every possible scenario, each one ending in tragedy no matter what choice they made. They thought about the people they had already lost, about the betrayal that might be lurking closer than they could bear to admit, and about the possibility that walking away might mean letting someone else suffer in their place. Each thought twisted the knife deeper, making them realize that there was no easy path forward, only sacrifices waiting to be made. And as they finally stood alone, wrestling with the weight of their decision, another message arrived that shattered any illusion of control they still clung to. It wasn't just a warning this time, it was proof. Proof that the shadow watching them had already stepped deeper into their life than they had ever imagined. Proof that every choice, every hesitation, had already been anticipated. It was the kind of message that made the air feel heavy and the ground beneath their feet unstable, leaving them frozen in terror but also burning with the realization that they were already running out of time. The danger was no longer looming in the distance, it was here, closing in and demanding an answer. The impossible choice was no longer a question of if, it was a matter of now. The night of reckoning arrived with a weight so suffocating it felt as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable collision between truth and terror. The main character, exhausted yet electrified by the adrenaline coursing through their veins, finally stood at the center of the storm, holding the last piece of evidence that had eluded them for so long. It wasn't a loud discovery, not the kind you'd see in a movie with fanfare and flashing lights, but rather a quiet, devastating moment when puzzle pieces that had seemed impossible to align suddenly locked into place. The names, the messages, the threats, the disappearances, all of it, traced back to someone they never thought they'd have to fear. Someone who had lived right there in the blind spot of their trust. The realization hit like a blade to the chest, because betrayal always hurts most, when it comes from the person who swore they would protect you. Confrontation was no longer optional. With the evidence in hand, they arranged the meeting in a place that carried too many memories to feel safe, an abandoned building they used to know well, a place that echoed with the ghosts of their past. Every step inside felt like trespassing into a tomb, the silence thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of their breathing as they moved deeper into the shadows. And then, from the darkness, the figure emerged. Not surprised, not ashamed, but with a calm smile that twisted the moment into something surreal. This wasn't the face of a stranger they knew it too well, and yet it looked different now, colder, sharper, as though the mask of normalcy had finally been stripped away. For a moment, words failed them, and all that remained was the suffocating silence between two people who had danced around this moment for far too long. When the words finally came, they cut deeper than any weapon could. Accusations, confessions, half-truths, and manipulations collided in a battle that wasn't fought with fists but with raw emotion and the heavy weight of truth. The villain revealed how every move had been calculated, how every doubt, every fear, every moment of paranoia had been planted deliberately like seeds growing into poison. It wasn't about money, or power, or even revenge. It was about control, about obsession, about proving that no matter how hard the main character tried to fight back, they had already lost before the game even started. It was a psychological war, designed to break them from the inside out, and for a moment it seemed as though it was working. The main character's defenses cracked under the pressure. Memories of betrayal and abandonment colliding with the icy certainty that they had been nothing more than a pawn in someone else's obsession. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the desperation of having nothing left to lose. Or maybe it was the clarity that comes only when you are pushed to the edge. But a surge of defiance rose up, cutting through the fear that had defined them for so long. They realized that the evidence they held wasn't just proof of guilt, it was leverage, a weapon that could shatter the control the villain believed was absolute. The confrontation escalated into a battle not of strength but of willpower. Every word thrown like a weapon. Every confession countered with determination. For the first time, the villain looked unsettled, the calm mask faltering as they realized their grip was slipping. The main character wasn't just surviving anymore, they were fighting back. And that shift in energy turned the confrontation into a war neither could afford to lose. The climax built to a fever pitch as truths tumbled out, each revelation more devastating than the last. The missing person who had disappeared, they had been used as bait, a pawn to lure the main character into this exact confrontation. The threats that had haunted them for weeks. Carefully orchestrated illusions meant to break their spirit. Every detail had been crafted to push them into the corner where they now stood. And yet, despite the careful planning, the villain had underestimated the one thing they couldn't control, the resilience born from betrayal. The standoff reached its breaking point, and in one heart-stopping moment, the villain made their move, trying to destroy the last piece of evidence and seal the truth forever. But the main character had been waiting for that very strike. And in a desperate adrenaline-fueled surge, they turned the trap back on its creator, exposing everything in a final act of defiance that shattered the illusion of control once and for all. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of their own ragged breathing. But before relief could settle in, one last twist unraveled everything they thought they understood. In the final words the villain uttered, half-crazed yet disturbingly calm, came the revelation that this was never about a single obsession. It was part of something larger, something already in motion long before their lives collided. The villain was not the mastermind, only a piece of a darker game that stretched far beyond what the main character could see. And as those final words echoed in the hollow space, the chilling reality set in. The battle may have been won, but the war had only just begun. The dust had barely settled, and yet the silence in the aftermath carried a weight heavier than the chaos that had come before it. The main character stood amidst the echoes of what felt like a lifetime of torment, their body trembling not from fear anymore but from the release of a fight they never asked to be part of. The confrontation had ended, the villain unmasked, and the truth laid bare in all its brutal honesty. But instead of triumph, what they felt was something closer to exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes every breath feel heavier. For the first time in weeks, the constant sense of being watched seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie calm that felt fragile, as though at any second the shadows might rise again. They wanted to believe it was over, that the nightmare had finally loosened its grip. But a voice deep inside whispered that closure never comes so neatly, not when betrayal and obsession have carved their way into your soul. Answers finally came, pieced together like a jigsaw puzzle of pain and revelation. The missing person who had disappeared was found, shaken and scarred but alive, proof that even in the darkest games, survival was still possible. The threats and manipulations that had haunted every waking moment were exposed for what they were: deliberate attempts to strip away hope, to keep the truth buried beneath layers of fear. And yet, knowing the how and the why didn't erase the scars. The betrayal of someone once trusted cut deeper than any threat, leaving wounds invisible to the eye but impossible to ignore. In conversations with those who remained by their side, they admitted that life would never return to what it once was. Normalcy had been shattered, and the best they could do now was rebuild with the pieces left behind. But even in that brokenness there was strength, the kind forged in fire, the kind that refuses to let darkness claim victory. The emotional release came not in loud declarations or grand speeches, but in quiet moments of honesty. Staring out a window at the sunrise and realizing they had survived something designed to break them. For the first time in so long, the morning light didn't feel like a trap waiting to snap shut, but a reminder that even after the darkest nights, dawn still arrives. They reflected on everything they had endured, the fear, the choices, the impossible ultimatums, and found a strange sense of pride in the fact that they never gave up, even when surrender would have been easier. They knew their scars would remain, but scars are proof of battles survived, of strength hidden deep within that only emerges when tested. And as much as they wanted to close this chapter forever, they also knew it had changed them in ways they could never undo. Yet even as they tried to move forward, the lingering air of mystery refused to disappear. The final words from the villain played over and over in their mind, chilling in their simplicity yet devastating in their implication. This was never just about one person, one obsession, or one twisted game. There were layers still unseen, forces at work far beyond what they had uncovered, and the uneasy feeling that this was only the beginning would not leave them. Every glance at a stranger on the street, every unexpected sound at night, every shadow that lingered a second too long reignited the paranoia that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over. And in that uncertainty lay the open wound that would keep audiences questioning long after the credits rolled. Was the danger truly gone, or had they only uncovered the surface of something far more terrifying? The resolution came not as a neat ending but as a mirror held up to everyone watching, asking them what they would have done, what choices they would have made, how they would have survived in the face of betrayal, fear, and obsession. The main character's journey became more than just a story. It became a reflection of the human fight for truth, the desperate need to reclaim control even when the odds are stacked against you. And as the final scene faded, the lingering impact wasn't just about who had been guilty or what secrets had been revealed, but about the haunting realization that sometimes the scariest part of a story isn't the villain you uncover, it's the unanswered question of who might still be watching, even when you think it's over.